Victims of domestic violence.
I was raped. My daughter was abused. Family court just didn't listen.
Hidden and on the run.
If I'd stayed in England, I'd be dead and my kids would be in care. It was state-sanctioned abuse.
For the first time, mothers who fled UK family courts, abducting their children, tell their stories.
I was abused by that court, as well as my husband.
We reveal research into 75 children forced into contact with fathers reported for abuse.
This is the national scandal of our time.
We investigate the deaths of 5 women linked to trauma suffered inside the family court.
It was almost like they signed a death warrant, 100% the family court.
And hear demands for urgent reform.
It's a national tragedy and we just don't know it's going on.
For months, we've been investigating allegations of serious hidden failures inside our family courts. These are the most difficult stories to tell. Our family courts operate mostly in secret to protect the privacy of children, and mothers risk contempt of court laws if they speak out. Mothers told us hundreds had left the UK with their children, leaving family and friends behind, and dozens are flying to Cyprus.
Hey, very warm welcome to London.
They're moving on to Turkish-controlled northern Cyprus, territory without a formal extradition treaty. We also made the journey to ask why. We spent months building up trust, viewing multiple police reports and risk assessments detailing allegations of domestic abuse.
I was going to have a breakdown. I was literally screaming in my head.
4 mums agreed to talk anonymously on camera as long as we changed their voices. In the UK, they risk being jailed for child abduction. Kerry.
It's so difficult. I've lost everything.
Sophie.
I was financially and emotionally abused.
Suzanne.
My family have been warned not to contact me, help me, or they'll be arrested.
And Rose.
When I left him, there was a campaign of abuse. I was stalked. I was harassed.
They all say Northern Cyprus is a safe haven, away not just from their abusers, but also the family courts.
I was raped. I was raped before I was due to give birth.
Rose, not her real name, was the first to tell her story.
My daughter, she'd come back with bruises, all documented, and when your child says, "Mummy, Daddy's hurting me," it breaks you.
Rose's case highlights complicated, drawn-out family court proceedings. Her partner was never convicted of a crime, but the BBC has seen multiple police reports written at the time where officers assessed her as being at risk of domestic abuse.
I had a domestic abuse worker. I was referred to victim support. I broke court orders on the advice of the police, but the court wanted contact at all cost. I was protecting my child.
Rose has never been accused of physically harming her child, but she was accused of alienating her ex-partner from their child. Parental alienation is a disputed concept, when a child rejects one parent because of manipulation by the other.
The court said, if you don't send your child, we're going to remove her, and they did.
Parental alienation syndrome was first coined by controversial US psychiatrist Richard Gardner and was widely rejected for lack of evidence. But today, the term parental alienation is supported by some psychologists and frequently used in family courts.
The handover was horrific. My child was screaming, kicking, saying, "Don't make me go, Mummy," grabbing me.
On one contact visit, Rose fled to northern Cyprus.
My child was with an abuser. It traumatised me. I had to get her and run. I travelled by plane, hire cars. I just escaped. I had to. I didn't plan this, but we were safe. The first night I just stayed awake and watched my daughter breathe.
What she did was against the law. When you're accused of child abduction, does that make you regret doing this?
There's an Interpol alert on us. We can't move from here. We are safe, but in a type of prison. I'd do it all again though. Anything to protect my child. What mum wouldn't?
Rose is not alone. We've spoken to 9 mums who say they fled after domestic abuse.
Hi, you okay?
Many told us they were accused of parental alienation.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, bye.
And could now face criminal action.
So that's another mother. She's really, really nervous. She is frightened, and she doesn't know whether or not she's going to speak to us.
We were also told over the past 10 years, a growing number of mothers had travelled to northern Cyprus. Those who did agree to meet us only did so after weeks of building up trust.
I was raped. I was financially and emotionally abused. I had to dress our child in a certain way. I'd live by his rules. But I wasn't living. I was taken over, a shell of a human being. After I left him, the abuse started on our child.
This woman we're calling Sophie says the family court made their lives worse.
I was handing my child to an abuser. I couldn't do it anymore. My child told me that they had suicidal thoughts. They said, "Mum, I'm going to commit suicide," and explained exactly how they were going to end their lives.
But then she too was accused of parental alienation.
The judge made the decision that I was parental alienating him from his dad. I was told I was the abuser. I've never even heard of parental alienation. I was warned not to break contact orders, or residency would be transferred.
But should you have stayed in England?
I had to go. I watched my son's childhood disappear. It broke me into pieces. I couldn't step into that family court again.
This mum was too frightened to go on camera, but she did agree to talk over the phone as long as we changed her voice. She says she was one of the first to arrive in northern Cyprus.
He was a violent, dangerous man with a criminal record. They didn't care. I lost my job, house, my friends and family. I was failed by every agency, the family courts. I sacrificed everything to protect my son. I lost my job, house, my friends and family.
She said some mums struggle to survive once they get here.
Since I've been here, around 75 mums have arrived, not all running from abusers, some from social services. Some have really struggled, been desperate, even stolen to feed their kids.
And will you ever go home?
My mum's dead. There's nothing left for me in England. I can't leave here. I can't go through all that again.
Thank you for talking to us. So, there's a pattern repeating with all these mothers we've spoken to. Serious allegations of domestic violence. A family court, they say, is not listening to their concerns, and a desperation that makes them want to run.
The women who I've met here, who have fled from the UK, are terrified.
Mina Atla is a Turkish Cypriot lawyer who represents many domestic abuse victims.
These women are being failed in their countries. They need to be offered some kind of amnesty, and there needs to be a path to safety for these women and their children.
Many of the mothers she helps run from allegations of parental alienation.
It's not child abduction, it's not parental alienation, it's domestic violence, it's child abuse. Parental alienation does not have any scientific value as far as I'm concerned, and it's not just as far as I'm concerned. The UN Special Rapporteur on Domestic Violence has also stated that parental alienation is not something that the courts ought to be considering when they're looking at custody cases.
There's no formal extradition from northern Cyprus to the UK. But if mothers do return, they could be arrested or their children taken into care. Some have had bank accounts frozen and been placed on Interpol no-fly lists.
It's so difficult. I left my family, my friends. I've lost everything. I didn't even get to say goodbye.
This mum says making the decision to run can lead to serious harm.
I've got friends who've been extorted out here because people found out their situation and they give information to the ex for money.
A risk of prosecution in the UK. She says she doesn't feel safe.
There are private investigators trying to find us. There's a list going round with names on. I'm petrified.
When you found out your name was on this list, what was your reaction?
It's like we're hunted by the family courts and our abusers.
After years of coercive control, she says the family court became an extension of that abuse.
The court should be trying to understand why women give up everything to flee just to protect their kids. The basic need of a child is to be protected, and we can't even do that in the UK.
These stories are shocking, but in the UK, we were told they're not isolated and are familiar cases inside family courts.
I personally believe this is the national scandal of our time.
For the first time, we can report a study into the attributed effects of trauma suffered inside family courts for victims of abuse.
Suicidal ideation, autoimmune conditions, cancer, women who reported that they'd had a miscarriage due to the stress and trauma of court-related proceedings.
The team at Manchester University spoke to 45 mums of 77 children. All reported abuse, including sexual abuse. All 45 mums were accused or threatened with parental alienation in court. 75 of the 77 children were forced into contact by the family court with the fathers they had reported for abuse, including those with child sex abuse convictions.
Were the women supported through this court process?
No, they weren't supported. Credible evidence of abuse was diminished or ignored completely. I'm talking about criminal convictions, so there were fathers who were convicted paedophiles. When the women and children raised abuse, the fathers immediately counterclaimed that this was alienation, that the mothers had coached the children to lie and make false allegations.
In your cases, when parental alienation was raised, what was the effect on the mothers?
The focus became about the mother and her behaviours and wrongs that she'd done, but actually there was no evidence that the women had done anything wrong, and plenty of evidence that the fathers had done wrong.
We've investigated the cases of 5 mothers, all reported being victims of domestic abuse, who either died or ended their lives during or after family court proceedings. We've spoken to friends, family, obtained coroner's reports and published family court judgments.
One mother suffered the most horrendous abuse. She was raped, controlled. Her partner monitored her using CCTV in their home. She was accused of parental alienation, and during family court proceedings, she took her own life.
Another refused to see her GP after her medical records were read out and used in her case. Friends say she later died from a preventable illness after seeking medical help too late. A third mother had a heart attack in the court building and later died, while a separate mum was left traumatised.
She suffered psychological abuse for years, and in her first family court appearance, without any reports being commissioned, she was accused by the judge of parental alienation. Those who know her said she never recovered. She was destroyed, traumatised, and eventually took her own life.
We've also learned of a deeply troubling story of a mum who suffered serious domestic abuse.
It's really bad. He's kept my child. It's killing me.
The words of a desperate mother were calling grace.
I need to talk. I'm falling apart.
Messages sent to friends after the family court transferred residency of her child to her former partner.
On video call, they asked me to come home.
Legally, we can't identify Grace, but we do know the man in this case was a convicted child rapist, and the family court knew.
He got custody. I'm like a puddle on the floor. Can't function.
Grace was accused of alienation. Her ex said she was turning the child against him.
It destroyed her. Her soul just completely disappeared. I tried everything I could to help, but it was just too late.
We tracked down two of Grace's friends. They say she only found out about her ex's conviction after they met.
And how did she react when she found out?
She told me she felt sick. I think her world was just turned upside down.
When residency was transferred to the father, what was her reaction?
She was broken, absolutely broken.
After she lost her child, these friends say she gave up on living.
Her child has been handed over to a convicted sex offender. And as a mother, I know exactly how she felt. How could she now protect her child? How was that endorsed by a judge?
After a period of ill health, Grace died. This was one of her final messages.
I'm unable to eat or sleep. It's a mess. Dead, dead, dead. I hate the family court.
When you emotionally and mentally give up, I suppose, her body followed, and that was it. It was almost like they signed her death warrant, I think.
Who did?
The court. 100% the family court. Sorry.
In northern Cyprus, many of the mums told us they couldn't cope and also feared for their lives if they stayed in the UK. We learned of a mother who fled after a decade of family court hearings. At first, she was too scared to talk. But on our second day, she agreed to meet.
We've been told by a third party to meet them in a local supermarket and then follow their car to a place where we can talk safely.
We've called this woman Suzanne.
This is it. This is it.
She'd only speak to us anonymously.
There's that car there. There they are.
The BBC has seen multiple police reports written by officers at the time alleging domestic abuse against Suzanne.
I'd face bursts of anger. That's when alarm bells started to go off. I was attacked in the bath. Other times I've been manhandled, left full of bruises. In all, I made about 50 separate phone calls to the police.
Suzanne's story highlights what can happen when complicated proceedings with claim and counterclaims are put before the family courts.
I was in and out of court all the time, it got so bad. Over 120 appearances. I was not listened to. My child was not listened to. It was state-sanctioned abuse.
She says she spent more than £100,000 in legal fees.
I was going to have a breakdown. I was literally screaming in my head. But I knew if I died, my kids would have ended up in care.
Do you regret making this decision?
It's changed me. I've lost all my friends, my life, my jobs, family members.
Despite professionals saying she was suffering trauma, Suzanne was accused of parental alienation. She then decided to run.
My family had been warned not to contact me, help me, or they'll be arrested. My dad died and I never got the chance to say goodbye. It's inhumane, disgusting.
Suzanne's son, a teenager, agreed to talk to us. He says he's now thriving in northern Cyprus.
I'm a straight-A student. I'm stress-free here. I want to be a doctor, but if I go back to England, I'll be taken into care. I have never been listened to.
Do you feel like a child who's been abducted?
No, not at all.
The power that the court can exert over a person is delicious to domestic abuse perpetrators.
We were told one mother. We showed our investigation to Jess Phillips MP, Labour's shadow minister on domestic violence and campaigner for family court reform.
The push on parent alienation is dangerous and it's harming children and women. This isn't a one-off, this isn't a bad judge, this isn't a rogue court in one part of the country. This is a tactic of abusers that is being used across every part of our country.
She says she's heard from thousands of desperate mothers.
This is not a small issue, it is the biggest issue in my inbox.
If you had the power, what would you do?
The urgency of this is for governments to act on. It needs to be written into law that the presumption of contact in cases where domestic abuse or sexual violence or any form of child abuse is present, that presumption of contact has to be earned, not given. It's a national tragedy and we just don't know it's going on.
The Domestic Abuse Commissioner said the cases uncovered by the BBC were harrowing and there was a need for urgent and wide-reaching reform of the family courts. Nicole Jacobs said abusers were using so-called parental alienation to deflect from their own abusive behaviour. The BBC has learned the government is investigating whether further action is needed on alienation. The judiciary has issued new draft guidelines for consultation on handling parental alienation claims in domestic abuse cases. So what next for the mothers and children on the run in northern Cyprus?
It's always the victim who loses out. It's me who's labelled as a serious criminal.
The basic need of a child is to be protected, and we can't even do that in the UK.
I am always looking over my shoulder. My biggest fear is that my child would be taken again.
The government told us it takes every case of international parental child abduction very seriously, and in recent years it has made significant improvements to the family court system to protect domestic abuse victims.